Hello, we are going to discuss a few concepts of compliant mechanisms that we have not touched upon so far in the course, apart from mentioning in passing those. So, we will look at those concepts little bit detail today. So, let us look at what those concepts are. There are three. One is intermittent contact aided compliant mechanisms. We had mentioned this briefly, but we will look at what it means for compliant mechanism design and what we can achieve when we allow intermittent contact. And the second one is what we call, I should actually put quote unquote compliant composite compliant mechanisms. By composite here we do not mean that compliant mechanism is made of composite material, which one can very well make, but here what we mean is combining two compliant mechanisms, two or more compliant mechanisms to achieve some unique functionality. And third one is using anisotropic properties of material to explore new avenues in compliant mechanisms. So, these are the three things that we will discuss today. Let us begin with contact aided compliant mechanisms, or for short CCM, contact aided compliant mechanisms. So, the C kind of captures everything, contact aided, that is, in these compliant mechanisms there will be contact as an aid to achieve something unusual and useful. So, the reference here is one of the references is this paper from International Journal for Numerical Methods in Engineering, and author is Nilesh Mankame. In fact, this work was done by Nilesh as part of his PhD thesis at University of Pennsylvania in 2004. Here is another paper by the same student now working for General Motors in the US. So, this in computers and structures. So, this also another thing where some regularized contact modeling was used to synthesize contact aided compliant mechanisms. And the third one is an interesting mechanism which we had seen a video of already. Now, we will discuss a little bit more about it. This is in ASME Journal of Mechanical Design, where we can use a compliant mechanisms to achieve complicated paths that have non-smooth points in them. So, let us first look at this non-smooth response from compliant mechanisms when you have only smooth actuation. So, this is one of the advantages of having contact. What you see here, A, the point A here and the beam A is undeformed. Now, there is a rigid support here, there is a rigid support. This is like a surface which is rigid, and when you apply force the beam will bend, come to B. So, B is somewhere, we do not know where it is, but it is there. Okay. So, A is undeformed. What we are showing here is the displacement of the tip, and here we have force. So, when force equal to 0 over at A, and when you apply some force somewhere here, you are there. Now, when you continue to apply force that increase the magnitude of the force, at some point the beam will touch the rigid surface, something like C, let us say C is somewhere there. Okay. There will be a point here which we have not shown there, let us call that D or something, where the beam would just contact. So, B, configuration B, if the force increases a little bit more, it will come and touch it, and after it touches, when you apply force, more and more force, that is keep increasing your force here, then this point that is coming down so far will start moving up, and it will do so rather abruptly. That is, this path here, the displacement versus force, will have a non-smooth point. This is a non-smooth point, and that is what we want. We want non-smooth response from smooth actuation. As far as F is concerned, F increases gradually, smoothly. There is no problem there, but the displacement suddenly will change its direction, and it does so all of a sudden. It is not discontinuous, but it is non-smooth. So, when you use intermittent contact, so contact that happens over there is intermittent, meaning that it just happens, remove the force, it is going to go back, there is no more contact. You have intermittent contact, and that is what we have the compliant mechanism exploiting here, so that we can get non-smooth output or non-smooth response from smooth actuation. So, that is the concept of this contact aided compliant mechanisms. By the way, CCM is also sometimes an acronym used for computational contact mechanics. Either way, this title is appropriate here, because we have to model contact here. So, let us look at what I just said in the form of the figure. So, when you are little bit deformed versus when you are touching, and when you are not touching, we see what happens. So, here is the contact thing here. So, here this is the force or W, the configuration. So, it starts here, in this case it comes like this and then goes up afterwards. So, here we have the non-smooth point, non-smooth point. Okay, what else can you do when you have contact? The other thing is tuning the stiffness. By that what we mean is that during the motion, when you are using a device, as you are applying more and more force, the stiffness of the structure changes, or stiffness of the compliant mechanism changes. That is natural, because the contact is changing the boundary condition. That is why we had the non-smooth thing there. You are solving one problem with some boundary conditions. The moment contact happens, there is a new boundary condition coming in that changes the entire response of the compliant mechanism. In particular, here we see how the stiffness can be changed, and here is a commercial device that I happen to have, that is basically a dental floss. It is a little device. So, it has the floss here which is flexible. So, this is just a dental floss which you can see it is flexible, that but the moment I apply force here, there is a contact here. So, there is a contact, when it touches, even if I apply more force, it does not deform this further. That is a contact is being used here to change the stiffness, right. Now, it is stiff and I cannot flex it anymore. Now, it is very stiff compared to when it was, where I could deflect a lot. The moment I press, I cannot deflect as much. So, this is a contact aided compliant mechanism, where the displacement is limited to certain value. So, we can tune the stiffness as needed. Okay. So, here as I showed, when we apply force over here, this is where there is a gap. If we did not see that, that gap closes. Initially when I press, this point will move like way, move this way, this will become taut. After, by that time, these two would have touched with each other. Once they touch, there is a stiffness increase, and when you even you apply more force, it doesn't apply more force this way and break it. So, that is the advantage of having intermittent contact. Here is another one whose video we had seen earlier. This is also a CCM. This again has a very complicated path generated here, again with non-smooth points. So, it starts here and it goes there and goes there. while this point goes here and goes here. The 2 points are shown, okay, which are over here. So, this part is amplified over there. All we do is smooth input over here back and forth, okay, like this, like a sawtooth is shown here. We just make it go back and forth. When we do that, there is contact here and there is also a contact here. So, that is written C1 contact here, C2 and C3, and because of that these points will generate these paths that have non-smooth points. In fact, the direction suddenly changes, instead of just going gradually like this, suddenly changes like that and changes like this. Okay. So, let us look at the device. Here is where the contact aided compliant mechanism is. There is a stepper motor here, stepper motor. So, which is going to pull this like that and then push it afterwards, and here is where we have couple of points and they will be tracing a curve here. These are electronics to control it. Again, contact points are contacting portions, one there symmetric, and another one is over here. So, this surface and this surface will touch each other, okay. That is what causes the change in direction and the stiffness. So, the paths actually in experiment they look like this. So, in the simulation we had seen that goes, that did not take into account viscoelasticity. What will happen is the point will start here, will go like this, and this is the non-smooth point, it will go there, and then while coming back it takes a different path because of, in this case, viscoelastic nature, it will go like this. So, we get enclosed paths like this. So, the other one let me do with a different color. So, it goes like this and then comes back like this, like a banana shaped curves or chili shaped curves. Okay. So, it is possible to get non-smooth response even though you have smooth input. Let us watch a video clip of this mechanism to understand what is happening here. Let us just see the video. Yeah, here is the device, of course left and right switched, and you can see where the contact, where the arrow is. When that contact happens there, this non-smooth behavior begins, and then soon after these contacts also take place over here and they would have changed their path. So, you have to focus, these where the 2 pins are there, they are tracing this complicated path, now going back, and then whenever the contact is lost, then suddenly these things will change their direction. Okay. So, this is how you can get very complicated motion. If you see this black one, which is polypropylene available in black color, so that has this single piece structure, that is there are no joints anywhere, it is just that there is intermittent contact over here and over here. Okay. So, that is the contact aided compliant mechanism. Let us go back to the presentation. So, in general if you want to model it, so what we need to do is model the contact between potential portion of the compliant mechanism, you need to know it ahead of time, and a rigid surface. It can also be a flexible surface and it can be a self contact. A compliant mechanism can touch itself also, like it happened in the second and third contact, actually self contact. So, over here this is self contact, whereas this is touching the rigid surface over there. Okay. So, a self contact can happen or with a rigid surface, and we should model that also by defining either potential function or springs that vary their stiffness based on the gap value. That is a new thing that was introduced here in synthesis that we had discussed earlier. This contact modeling should also be included. So, the way contact, one of the ways it can be handled is when you have a displacement boundary condition such as this, a point has to go by certain distance, we can impose that by using some high stiffness in finite element analysis. Here what we do is, based on the gap which is continuously changing, we can define a variable stiffness so that we can model the contact. So, how is that variable stiffness defined? Here we have used this function, gamma is some stiffness value 1 plus e raised to minus m times x by g naught. X is the displacement, g naught, and then 1 minus 1. So, what will happen is this K s here can be made to vary like this. So, there is a factor m. As you increase the value of m, it get closer and closer to this, but it will never be sharp like that. It will always be somewhat smooth like this. So, you can use this in synthesis and design this contact aided compliant mechanisms. So, what can you do with that? So, two things we discussed, one is tuning the stiffness, other is getting the non-smooth paths. In both cases non-smoothness is the important one, even though the input is smooth. Okay. So, some examples is an OR gate and OR the type of gate. So, what we want is that we want to solve a problem whether you apply force 1 only or force 2 only or both of them together, we want this to go up. That is what we want to design. This is an OR gate, compliant OR gate. For fun, there is no really application right now, but it could be there in the future. We can make AND gate, OR gate, NAND gate, and all the logic also can be done using compliant mechanisms. So, whether you apply force 1 or force 2 separately alone or apply them together, you should get this. Okay. And here is the design that was obtained using optimization. So, here is the force and you see this is going up, here is the force, it is going up, and here is the force both ways, it is going up. So, it is an OR gate, you can design those. And what is the contact here? It is actually in terms of modeling that we had some force here when we are doing this. So, the gap, there was a spring put in, so that the stiffness was defined, which you do not see that kind of spring, and we thought that we were not able to, because the point will move this way or that way, it had that contact put into this over here. Okay. And here is another one where contact surfaces are actually defined. These are the potential contact surfaces. We do not mean to say that definitely contact should happen there, but we are saying these are generally fixed ones, those are fixed, and there is force applied here. What we want here is a path that is somewhat like this. So, it should move down and then move this way, in the sense that there should be a motion this way and that way. Okay. These are again potential contact surfaces. So, that you can define potential contact surface here, and there is of course symmetry there. So, here is a design that was obtained. So, when we have this, when we push on this, I suppose, yeah, the force was in this direction. When you push, this thing will come and touch it, and afterwards it will move this way. So, if there is an object, it will grab it and then move it that way. So, you get a design for this. So, that was using contact modeling. Here is one where the input makes one cycle, output makes 2 cycles, which we had discussed in the context of signal processing, like a frequency doubler, but it is a cycle doubler, and that design, of course, here is the potential contact surface. Here it is very specific, so I might as well call it contact point. Okay, that is where initially when you do this point is going to come back, and then when you put more, when it touches, it starts coming back here. So, it will move this way and then that way, that will be one cycle of this from here to there. Now, when this moves back, then this will go back again, okay, and then come back. So, it will be where it is. So, 2 cycles. So, that was this contacted compliant mechanism. Again, this is the prototype where we have the potential contact surfaces there, and this was to measure the displacement using a Hall effect sensor. You can see there is asymmetry. So, this one is not exactly same as the second one. That is because of various other factors that exist in this mechanism, in particular the viscoelasticity. Okay, now let us move on to another concept, which is called composite. Again I emphasize, it is not that compliant mechanisms are made of composite materials, but the mechanism itself is a composite of 2 or more compliant mechanisms. So, here we wanted to combine a force amplification compliant mechanism and a displacement amplification compliant mechanism into one to get both mechanical advantage and geometric advantage at different places. This was to crush cemented sand pieces, specimens, in order to measure their breaking force. So, the top one is the FACM and this is DACM. There are different kinds, and what happens is when you apply the force, there is the specimen that is there that will be crushed, and how much our force is applied, we can see that in terms of the displacement here, and measure by doing calculations what that breaking force is. So, here functionality wise there are 2 distinct functionalities. One is by hand we should be able to apply force, and FACM generates a lot more force to crush a cemented sand specimen. Afterwards, in order to see how much force has been applied, we also have the DACM. So, these are all DACMs, displacement amplification compliant mechanism, that shows you some displacement which you can measure visually or otherwise to know how much force we have applied. So, this is a new way of doing composite compliant mechanism to achieve some interesting functionality. If there is a functionality that is more than one part, you can use 2 different mechanisms. Here is another one which is to make a mechanism. Again there should be only one input here, and we want to be able to grab biological cells or embryos. In this case the bulk stiffness of zebrafish embryo is 8 Newton per meter, that is very small, and for animal cell stiffness could be even this much smaller, 0.1 Newton per meter or 0.001 Newton per meter. So, how do you do? So, then your lithography will have limitation in terms of what can be the width of that. In fact, what you see here, which is only 0.7 millimeters, this is 0.7 millimeters, this is 1.7 millimeters from here to here, and these beams are extremely narrow, they will be only 5 microns. So, when you have that 5 microns, can you make such a large device as 10 millimeter by 10 millimeters? That is not possible with any process. So, here what we do is we have a mechanism, inside there is another mechanism. So, there is this, and inside that this one is there. That is what we mean by composite, and that was done, and we can actually see the zebrafish embryo which is over there actually grasped and squeezed. So, it will come back, it should, okay, it just yeah, you see that it just squeezing that. I will play again, yeah. So, we can match the stiffness of the biological cell to that of the compliant mechanism by having a small one inside a big one. Big one, what it does here is when apply the force, it will bring this portion and this portion which you see here and here, it will bring them closer. Once they go there, here is where our contact is happening again, they touch, is also a CCM. When they touch, then the force starts, this one starts going this way, this one will start going this way, they will grab the cell. Okay. And likewise you can, there is a DACM here which will amplify the displacement there. So, you can measure the displacement and compute the forces. So, a lot of things in one mechanism. And the tuning the stiffness, we have one here where the same thing, we apply the force like this, these things will come together, when they touch these things open up here. So, when you put something over here, it will actually grab it and pull it. We will watch the video. Here again two different compliant mechanisms are combined together to make a composite mechanism to tune the stiffness as well as get geometric amplification and manipulation capability, stretching an object without attaching anything to it. Let us watch this video where we have this compliant mechanism, all single piece. We just push there, continuous or smooth input, they touch over here and they open up, and you can put a piece of rubber band as it will shown, and when they are opened then it will grab and then stretch next time you press it. Now, they are opened, when they open you can leave a little piece of something what you want to stretch. So, this time it will be dropped when they touch. So, you have the little piece of rubber band, and when it grabs and pulls you can see it being pulled. So, you can actually pull with a single P2, that is what contact enables you here, and also a mechanism inside another mechanism. Okay. Now, let us spend a few minutes about anisotropy based compliant mechanism. So far when we discussed design, we wanted to get a number of segments, beam segments arranged in a particular way in order to get the functionality. That is what we did with several design methods. Now, instead of that, how about exploiting anisotropy? This is something that is newly being explored in compliant mechanisms. By that, let me show an example of a block. Okay. What I have here is a special block, of course, is 3D printed. So, you have basically a beam, like a wide beam. So, normally when you have a beam and you apply force, you expect it to only bend. This particular one actually twists. Okay. If you want to see, maybe sideways I put and then apply force here, you can see it being twisted. So, I am only applying force, transverse force, right. You can see it very clearly how it twists. I am not doing anything, I am just pushing it here, I am not doing anything at all. So, it actually is twisting in addition to bending, and that is happening because of anisotropy that exists in this one. That is, it is stiffness in the bending and twisting directions are adjusted. Basically what you have is a slab, of course it is 3D printed, but imagine that you have made a material where you have a slab, that slab itself has anisotropic properties. In this particular case, the blue ones you see rods, they are all stiff material embedded into a flexible material which is the translucent material here. So, because of that it is getting. So, instead if I make another thing here, this is again you see some streaks here, there is basically holes there. We have 3D printed with one material with holes. This particular one, when I do it, you do not see twisting, even though you have the same nature, the anisotropy is not dominant here. There is one more which has fiber like things printed into it. Now, if I apply a force, there is a little bit of twist, but you can't see. So, if I keep it like this and apply, you do not see that much, you only see bending, there is no twisting like we saw with this other one. So, this was very dramatically we could see the twisting. So, apply force, to actually see that it actually twists, right, the whole thing is twisting like that. You can see there are more rods here, fewer rods here, so it has that. Okay. So, this particular one is what now people are exploiting to make cylinders like this. You have a cylinder and there is a fiber that is woven, this again 3D printed for just to demonstrate, but this is what people are exploiting. Let us look at a few examples of this. So, this is the reference for this. Shape shifting is it is more of a Popular Science article written by Professor Sridhar Kota a couple of years ago, where he talks about some other things, and this being pursued by few others. I will show the references. So, what you have here, if you have what I just showed, you have woven fiber like this. There are 3 different fibers, 3 different colors, it is shown there. But you can actually build what is called a robot snake, which is actually a compliant one. Basically, you can see what happens. So, it can stretch, it can twist, it can bend, it can do all kinds of things, it can do all of them together. So, you can actually make things go more like an elephant trunk, okay. And this is the idea. So, you can have something straight, these are pictures taken from that article, it can bend, twist, and do all kinds of things. What is the purpose of that? It is a different type of compliant design. So, you can do pick and place. So, let us say that there are all these snakes and they pick these balls and sort them, or pick and place, it can grab things as I will show. So, it is basically you again want things to be flexible or compliant to do your job, but it is more like a robot, because it is not for one particular function, but it is for several functions. So, instead of having a rigid thing like this, you are more like an elephant's trunk that is going to do the job, and that is what people are working on now. And the interesting thing, as you can see here, is that there is a glass tube here. Inside that you put the snake, it actually grabs it so heavily that it can hold the weight of the thing there. So, you can actually pick up things, like an elephant will wrap its trunk around a log and then lift the log, right. So, you can actually do this, and this is real, people are doing that. Here is a paper from ASME Journal of Mechanisms and Robotics by Girish Krishnan and et al. In Sridhar Kota's group, where they are talking about this pneumatic artificial muscles. This has been around for a long time, actually something called McKibben actuator has been around for a long time. Now, they are exploring it, they call something called FREE, fluid filled fiber reinforced elastomeric enclosure. That is a long thing, they have put an acronym FREE, but that is not the point. The point is that you can make things that are flexible, and you can make them contract like this. So, here it is elongated, now you can see it has moved. So, that is the movement by just pressurizing it. So, this is the McKibben actuator, what they call air muscle, pneumatic, so air muscle, and there are these oven angles, this angle when it is greater than or less than 54.73, whether it will contract or expand is being shown here. And this is the original thing, when you pressurize it, it is going to contract like this. So, there is an actuation. The other thing, as I just showed, you can actually wrap it around things and pick them up and put somewhere else, and you can put 3 of them, and so one of them bends or another one does not bend. So, you can get this helical motion that so instead of having one, as you saw in Scientific American article, there are 3 of them, each of them is pressurized differently. So, you can get lot of twisting and bending motions. So, you can actually make things that are flexible. So, it is a new thing like this. So, there are 3 things here, 3 things like parallel motion, they go like hydra, go here, they can walk, they can do this. This is more of a robot concept, not necessarily a mechanism, in the sense that with one thing, with control, you can do lots of tasks, not that you have to design something for a specific purpose, but you can do these things. They are smart because of design and not there is any smart material. They are just fluid filled tubes where you change the pressure and they bend, twist and do what you want. So, just to summarize what we discussed in this lecture, intermittent contact can be used judiciously for changing the stiffness for getting the non-smooth paths. So, one is non-smoothness, that is something we discussed, and the other is tuning the stiffness, that is changing the stiffness as needed. That is the contact aided compliant mechanism we talked about, or so called CCM. Interest in CCM is increasing now, even though we had done this work more than a dozen years ago. Now, people are coming back to it and doing interesting things with it. The other is multi-level composite, again quote unquote composite. It is not composite material, it is just that we put two compliant mechanisms together and show interesting behavior. And how we can use anisotropy of the material, how do you put these fibers inside, how do you orient them. In fact, you can design the anisotropy, you can when you design a compliant mechanism, geometry not be complicated, geometry is straightforward, but you make the material anisotropic. And that anisotropy that you design computationally, you can get it using the fiber orientation or holes that you put and so forth. So, you can do it in 2 steps, that is the next thing. So, that is you are not dependent on the geometry of the material to get topology this and that, it can be straight and anisotropic material will take care of it. Like we showed that there is a slab, when you apply transverse force it actually makes the things twist. Similarly, we have made things where if you stretch something it will twist, that is the nature of the anisotropy of the material. So, we have discussed 3 new concepts and there are many more coming. Some of them will have proper design techniques for them, some of them give you intuition to design new kinds of compliant mechanism, especially when you have anisotropy with air muscles, you can look at this compliant robots if you will, that is also possible now. Thank you.